Namaste, my friend. Welcome to Bhakti Yoga Conference, Grace in an Age of Distraction. Hosted here at Harvard Divinity School. My name is Happy Jack, the founder of Happy Jack Yoga University and a student here at Harvard. And really our goal, which is what we're accomplishing today with a very special guest, our goal is to bring in more than 40 prominent voices in Bhakti Yoga. We're talking monks and scholars, yogis, thought leaders, musicians, scientists. Today is a Hindu chaplain slash lawyer, and people with different perspectives on this journey of bhakti as we progress on our spiritual paths. At the moment, we got over 3,600 registrants. Keeps gaining momentum. So thank you all for spreading the word. Thank you for being here with us. We hope to have time at the end for some Q&A, although our presenter today has a lot of amazingness to share with us, but we will have a little bit of time for Q&A. Save those for the end. I'm going to spotlight our speaker as I say a few words. Please welcome to the stage Venkata Bhatta, also known as Dr. Vineet Chander. He was born and raised in New York City and discovered the path of Krishna Bhakti in his youth, initially through the devotional community called New Vrindavan. As an initiated student of His Holiness Radhanath Swami for more than 2 decades, he's now a sought-after speaker and teacher in his own right, particularly known for his ability to infuse ancient wisdom with relevant examples and avenues for application. He's offered classes and seminars in a number of temples, ashrams, yoga studios, and online platforms. In his professional life, Venkata works as Assistant Dean of Religious Life at Princeton University and serves as Princeton's Hindu chaplain. His writing has appeared in a number of publications, and he is co-author of 2 academic volumes on Hinduism and spiritual care. He earned his JD, or law degree, from the George Washington University Law School, his MA in religion from Rutgers University, where his advisor was Professor Edwin Bryant, who we all know and love, and his doctorate from New York University. Venkata and his wife Krishangi Devi Dasi were among the handful of pioneering community members who came together in the early 2000s to found the Bhakti Center in New York City. They have served the project in a variety of roles, including as pujaris, or temple priests, educators, mentors, and community group leaders. Venkata served as a board member of the Bhakti Center for 5 years. And just sharing a few words of how we connected. So I first met you, Dr. Chander, Venkata, in 2022. And because yourself and Lucinda Mosher had written this beautiful book called Hindu Approaches to Spiritual Care, and our Harvard professor, Clooney, brought you in to speak with us through Zoom. And so we got exposed to you, your teachings, your book, and I love the book so much. We actually made it part of our curriculum for one of our teacher trainings. So this is a book that we engage and love because it's super helpful for this yoga as spiritual care course. And then we crossed paths a couple times at the NACA, which is the North American Hindu Chaplain Association. I knew you were a big part of founding that, and I was attending some of those. We didn't really meet. But I knew at the time, I just had this feeling like first time we met in Professor Clooney's class, and of course, knowing that you're connected to Professor Bryant, studying with him, and heard you on the Nam Ross podcast, and then at the North American Hindu Chaplains Association. I mean, I just knew back in 2022, at some point that we bringing you to the community, and now is the time. Now is the time to happen. So it was a privilege to have you here with us. The session today is called Fear and Trembling, Unraveling the Mystery of Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 11. My friends, if you are ready to get started with Venkata Bhatta, throw your arms in the air and loudly chant, Haribol! Beautiful. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here. And when you first were gracious enough to invite me to this conference, I was, of course, honored with the invitation, but I was like, how is he going to pull this off? When I just looked at the list of invited speakers, I was like, I don't know if there's ever been um, a gathering of this sort with these folks, and I'm just so honored and humbled. So many of my own teachers, mentors, heroes, and heroines, are on this, on this dais virtually, from Rukmini and Anuttama to Chaitanya Charan, Sita Devi, Mohan Vilas, just amazing folks, and of course my own primary teacher, His Holiness Radhanath Swami. So just so much love and appreciation to you for putting this all together.
Well,
Um,
it is honestly, it is what it is because people like you said yes. So thank you for being so kind to spend your time with us. And I know you've got something really, a really powerful presentation prepared for us today. And just before we dive into that, would
yeah.
you share a little bit, what is it that brought you to your spiritual path? What brought you to bhakti? How did you end up here?
Yeah. Um, it's a long story, so to speak, and I'll touch on some aspects of it a little bit later. But for now, let me just say my experience was very much growing up in a sort of hyphenated identity. Uh, the American-born child of immigrants, part of a religious minority in America. I was born and raised in New York City, as you noted. Um, Aware that I religiously, my family identified as Hindu, but not really sure what that meant. We didn't have a very strong sort of spiritual foundation in our household. And I think it all just set me off on my own kind of spiritual quest, as cliched as that might sound. And that quest, with some twists and turns and some wonderful exploration of many traditions, not just, Indic traditions, but Abrahamic traditions as well, and even non-theistic traditions. But that search eventually brought me, even as a teenager, to an amazing devotional community called New Vrindavan, located in West Virginia. And I'll share a little bit more about that in the presentation. But that was the beginning of the end of my material life, so to speak. Not really. My material life and my struggles in it still go on, but at least that was an opening of immense grace, and where I was able to meet, just wonderful, loving teachers, guides, mentors, and that's where I was able to connect with the person who would become my primary guru, Radhanath Swami. And so
Wow.
here I am.
Beautiful, such a beautiful story, and actually very encouraging. Our community, we lead yoga retreats around the world, and we're going to be going to Govardhan Eco Village in November. Our community is actually going to New Vrindavan this June. Oh,
By
there
the
you
way,
go.
just some promotion for Govardhan Eco. I just got back,
You just
and
got back.
I'm still there in spirit. So we share a love for the Govardhan Eco Village, I think.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So in addition to there, we're going to host a retreat at New Vrindavan in June. And I mean, I've been there several times, but first time bringing our community there. So very encouraging to hear that that was a space that was so important for you in your spiritual path.
Yeah, for sure. And I still consider it in many ways, one of my sort of happy places and home away from home.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for giving us some insight. I, of course, I'd want to ask so many questions, but let's turn it over to your presentation. And
Uh, are we good?
you're good to go. Yeah, we can see it perfect.
Okay, great. I'm going to start the slide presentation. If at any time something goes wonky with the tech, please just stop me and let me know, and feel free to interrupt. Yeah. Well, thank you again for that introduction, Jack. What I'd like to do in this presentation, this might be a little bit different for those who have been following along with some of the other presentations. I hope it'll complement and add value to this amazing conference. What I'd like to do is take something of both an overview as well as a deep dive into not just the Gita itself, but a particular chapter of the Gita, chapter 11. And I'll get into why and what drew me to this particular chapter, which is in some sense, I think not one of the more typical chapters to explore within our own Bhakti Yoga tradition. But first, let me begin, as we often do, with some prayers of invocation and gratitude. And I want to invite everyone to take this time, if you're able to and you feel comfortable doing so, perhaps even closing your eyes or softening your gaze, and just take a moment or two to bring to your heart's eye, your mind's eye, a teacher or teachers whom you'd like to express gratitude towards. Om Agyantimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was blinded by the darkness of ignorance, but the grace of my teachers has opened my eyes with the healing ointment of wisdom. With gratitude, I offer my deepest respects unto them. So before we get into the heart of the presentation, I want to just start with a little bit of a story. And this is a story of a householder devotee, a grihastha, who goes to see his guru, who's a swami, a sannyasi. Um, and this householder, he goes to see his guru in a very despondent state. And so the guru can see he has dark circles under his eyes. He's lost a ton of weight. Um, he looks very frail and very disturbed. And he goes and he says, Guruji, I'm in need of advice and guidance. My life seems to be falling apart. Just within the last few months, my business has totally torpedoed and failed. The bank is foreclosing on my property. My creditors are coming after me. We had to pull the kids out of their expensive private school, and they're really struggling right now. And all this is putting an immense strain on my marriage. My wife won't even speak to me anymore. She's just blaming me for all these troubles in our life because of my bad business decisions. And in such a state of mind, what to speak of, chanting attentively or doing any of my bhakti practices, but I'm beginning to even lose faith in God altogether. So, Maharaj, Guruji, please help me, give me some advice. And the Guru, he closes his eyes for a moment and he says, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. When I feel overwhelmed, I turn to the Bhagavad Gita. I say a prayer asking Lord Krishna to reveal to me whatever he wants me to know to solve my problem, whatever the answer is to the questions burning in my heart. I pray, please reveal to me what is that answer that you're sending me right now. And then I open the book at random and I place my finger on the page. And invariably, whatever my finger is pointing at, Lord Krishna has revealed to me that is the answer to the problem that is plaguing my life at the moment. So my dear disciple, this is the advice that I give you. And a few months later, the guru is on his travels. He returns to that particular location and he's wondering, what happened to my disciple? I want to follow up. And so he follows up and he sees the disciple pulls up to the mandir, to the temple in a brand new BMW. And he steps out and he's wearing a nice new suit and he looks 10 years younger and he has a big smile on his face and he offers his obeisances to his guru and he says, Guruji, by your mercy, your advice was spot on. I got the answer I was looking for. It completely solved all my problems. And the guru is like completely, he's at the edge of his seat and he says, well, what happened? What happened? Tell me. And he says, Guruji, I did exactly what you said. I prayed to Krishna. I opened the Bhagavad Gita at random. I put my finger and my finger landed on two words that changed my life completely. It was the answer I was looking for. And the guru is, what were the two words? What were the two words? And the disciple says the two words were chapter 11. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you got that. I think it's a very American reference, but for those who don't know, Chapter 11 bankruptcy is what people file. So that's a little bit of a joke. It actually is not the presentation, um, but it's a play on Chapter 11 and a way of perhaps bringing us into what the heck is Chapter 11 and what does it have to tell us? Are there answers for us? As much of a sort of a little, play on words and pun and joke that as that story was. By the way, that's it. Let me just be clear: that didn't actually happen. It was just a setup for a joke, and you can put it into the chat box if you liked or didn't like the joke. But it does bring to mind this bigger question of what does this mysterious chapter 11 have to tell us? Are there answers for us spiritually in what can sometimes seem like a bit of um, a mystery that's just kind of smack in the middle of the Gita? I want to take us back on a more serious note. Jack, you mentioned New Vrindavan and how that in many ways is part of my origin story. Um, One of the things I want to share about the very first visit that I made to New Vrindavan with my family, and I think I was about 13 years old at the time, we ended our visit with a trip to the gift shop. So there was a wonderful gift shop there. And I had saved up, as I remember, I had saved up some of my allowance, and I had just a certain amount of money for some souvenirs, some spiritual souvenirs from the gift shop. And I had just about enough money left over for two posters, and I really wanted posters to hang up in my room. So this beautiful devotional art. And so of all the posters that were there, I had to choose two, and these are the two. This is not a real. I kind of had to recreate this to because I didn't have a photo of my actual room, but it is a true story. I did hang up these two posters on either side of my bedroom window, and the two posters that I chose out of all the ones that were available there, one was this vision from the 11th chapter that you see on the right side of the screen of the universal form, the Vishvarupa or Virata Rupa of Lord Krishna. And I remember when choosing this poster thinking, I was just starting to read the Gita for myself and starting to figure it out. But I remember thinking, okay, this must be, if there's one image to have, this must be it, because this is, right? This is the form of the divine that is the biggest, the baddest, the most comprehensive. So if you've got to choose, this has got to be the one, right? I mean, it's all inclusive. It's just and at the same time, I was also drawn almost paradoxically to this other image for the second poster that in some ways was almost a polar opposite, because this was a depiction of Krishna and Arjuna that seemed so gentle and soft. I know it's a little hard to tell, but if you're familiar with this image, this remains one of my favorite images, and actually I have a painting of this in my office at work. Um, the detail is amazing. The looks of just love and compassion on both Arjuna's and Krishna's face in this painting. It's almost just like melts the heart. But very different in tone to the sort of larger than life, fierce vision of the universal form. And somehow I was drawn to both of these posters and hung them both up in my room. And it was almost like a back and forth between the vision of spirituality that was very much around this sort of majesty and power and almost, as we'll soon see, almost kind of awesome and terrifying vision of divinity. And then this sort of hint of love and relationship, this kind of deep, deep friendship shared by Krishna and Arjuna. And over the years, I've returned to this kind of juxtaposition, this contrast between these two images that I think very much speaks to sort of these two approaches to Krishna or to God. Um, I've had the fortune and honor of teaching a Bhagavad Gita class or leading a study of the Bhagavad Gita for almost 20 years now to college students, particularly at the university where I serve at Princeton. And invariably, year after year, when we go through, because we kind of sequentially and thematically go through the Gita, when we arrive at the 11th chapter, invariably there are students, particularly students from a Hindu background or who have some familiarity with the text, um, who will say something like, oh, the 11th chapter, that's where Krishna reveals his real form. Or that's the climax of the Gita, right? Because again, this assumption or this understanding that bigger is better and that obviously this is the fullest picture of divinity. Um, on the flip side, for those of us perhaps who identify strongly with this sort of devotional tradition, um, the 11th chapter can feel very out of place because what our hearts are usually drawn to is more of this sort of personal relationship that we see, this friendship shared between Krishna and Arjuna. And the 11th chapter can seem almost a departure from that. Like, what the heck is this chapter doing in the middle of this sweet sort of, devotional narrative, particularly in the middle section of the Gita, which our acharyas, our great teachers, often cite as the sort of the bhakti center of the Gita, which itself is a bhakti text, but it becomes even deeper and sweeter in the middle six chapters of the Gita, chapters 7 to and including 12. So the 11th chapter can seem like an anomaly. What is this frightening, kind of vision of raw power and energy doing in this very sweet bhakti section? I sometimes kind of joke about, well, what if the Bhagavad Gita were turned into a Hollywood or Bollywood movie? And I think there would be two ways of going about it. One way would be if you really made the focal point the 11th chapter, I think you would do major CGI, right? Because this is, as we'll soon see, the descriptions that are given. This is the special effects section of the Gita for sure, right? This is where you'd blow the whole budget trying to depict this kind of like really wild special effects. On the other hand, I think from a more sort of heart-centered bhakti approach, I think the Bhagavad Gita movie would maybe be more of like an indie film. It would be more of maybe like a bromance that just focuses on this relationship between these two people, maybe like one camera just focused on this dialogue. So again, there's this juxtaposition, and what I'd like to do in this presentation is walk us through a bit of a summary read of the Gita, of the 11th chapter of the Gita, excuse me, where we can maybe, we're not going to, go through verse by verse, but kind of look at it in terms of sections and the trajectory of the chapter, and try to reflect. And I'm gonna use a kind of a framework that a lot of Vedanta and yoga traditions use for reading. That's not just about reading the text, which is sometimes called shravanam, which literally means hearing, because reading a text is like hearing the recitation, but also includes mananam, reflection, right? Taking what we're reading and kind of mulling it over, digesting it, ruminating on it, discussing it, and then leading to nididhyasanam, or applying it, right? How does this, how do the lessons that are being taught here, the message that's coming through, how do I apply this in my life? Where does it show up? Where could it show up in my life? So a little bit of context, and I apologize, but just in the interest of time, we might jump around a little bit quickly at times. So hold on to your seats, especially if this is newer territory for you. So before we get into chapter 11 itself, sometimes it's really helpful to look at a part of the Gita in context, because often what we can do, even without knowing it, is we can look at sacred texts or parts of sacred texts in isolation, and then we sort of lose the larger narrative. We lose the thread. So if we look at the context, what came immediately before chapter 11? Well, we have the ninth chapter, which in some ways really is the heart of the Gita, and concludes with a verse that's actually the mathematical center of the Gita. And in this verse, which many of our great teachers, our acharyas, particularly a teacher named Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, these teachers and Vishwanath, they say that this verse really is the heart center of the Gita. And the verse goes, Manmana bhava mad bhakto. Always think of me, Krishna says, and become my devotee. So think of me in this mood, this bhav of being a devotee. Think of me in a devotional spirit. And that's how the ninth chapter concludes. The 10th chapter actually picks up right from the ninth chapter, because in a sense, paraphrasing here, but Arjuna says, Krishna, you've just blown my mind and opened up my heart with this wonderful instruction to always think of you. And yet, what do I do when I go out into the world and I see and experience so much out into the world? How can I remember you and think of you there? And so Krishna says, I'm going to tell you some ways. I'm just going to give you a few examples of ways that you can recognize me and think of me in the things around you. And so in the 10th chapter, we have this beautiful poetic litany of ways that we can remember Krishna as the wondrous things that we experience in the world, whether it's natural beauty, whether it's the prowess and power and awesomeness of the greatest of any, in any category, the Himalayan mountain peaks, the vast ocean, the majestic great white shark, or the roaring lion, right? These are the images of great power and majesty. And Krishna says, all of that is just a spark of my splendor. So Krishna in the 10th chapter very much describes in a literary way or in a spoken way ways that we can remember or recognize him. And at the start of the 11th chapter, Arjuna makes a request. He says, I've heard everything you say. I love everything you say. I'm not arguing with you. I'm not pushing back. In fact, I have full faith in what you're saying. And yet I also have a request. Will you show me? Will you give me a visual? Now, why does Arjuna make his request? And this shows up in the first four verses of the 11th chapter. In one sense, there's something very endearing about it, I think, because we tend to be very visual creatures. And and so in a sense, I think it's something we can relate to, right? Where Arjuna is saying, like, okay, I've heard all this, but it still feels maybe a little abstract, a little theoretical. You know, what'd be really helpful is if I could just see a visual. Can you just show me, right? And there's something very endearing that even by the 11th chapter, even fairly deeply, deep into this conversation, Arjuna is still making requests that I think we can relate to, right? And in that spirit, Srila Prabhupada, in one of the commentaries or purports to these verses, he explains that Arjuna actually is asking less for himself and also and more for us, thinking about generations to come and what we will need to deepen our faith or to truly believe, and also what we will need to be discerning out in the world, particularly, and Prabhupada goes into this in his commentary, particularly to evaluate when others make claims of being on the level of Krishna. And so he writes, Arjuna is thinking that although he may accept Krishna as a source of everything, others may not. And so he wants to establish Krishna's divinity. He wants to offer us, future readers of the Gita, a way that we can really be sure that Krishna really is the source of everything and this amazing uh, conduit or not conduit, but this animating force that brings meaning and purpose and really is the foundation of everything that is. So what is Krishna's response? Krishna agrees. And in a sense, what in Krishna's agreeing, he's establishing a couple of things. One, he's establishing that he is actually everything in one place simultaneously. Um, and it's interesting because in a sense, by showing Arjuna this vision, Krishna is simply giving Arjuna a way of accessing something that's there already. And so here's a little bit of a lesson for us too, right? Krishna is present in everything in a dynamic way. Everything is, as Srila Prabhupada would sometimes say, everything is already Krishnized, but we need the eyes to see it, right? And so in a sense, Krishna is saying, yes, this is a reality that's existing at all times, that's existing all around you. But you can't see it with your present vision. And so I will, through my grace, give you the divine vision to behold, right? So even there, we are in need of grace. This is a bit of a crude analogy, but if anyone's ever seen, or if you're like into true crime stories, or if you're into like these like crime, dramas and movies, sometimes what they'll depict like a crime scene, which seems, by sort of external vision to be just like a clean room or something, and then what are they like? They are able to put this particular kind of UV light or something that then can show all of the blood splatter everywhere. Um, and again, it's a crude analogy, so I apologize for that. But the idea is that material, that the blood or whatever was already there. It just takes a certain kind of technology to be able to see it. And so, in an analogous way, right, divinity is all around us. Everything is a testament to Krishna's identity as the supreme, the foundation of Brahman itself. And yet we don't have the vision. So Krishna says, "Okay, Arjuna, I'll give you the vision to see it." And so now we zoom out, and Sanjay, the narrator, he gives his best attempt to put this vision into words. He says, if hundreds of thousands of suns were to rise at once into the sky, it might resemble, it would just give us a glimpse of the effulgence of that supreme person. So this bright effulgence beyond anything we could actually describe this multiplicity. There's description of the ways in which this vision defies enumeration. It's wondrous beyond comprehension. And Srila Prabhupada comments, Sanjaya has to analogize to imaginable phenomena. So we have some concept of what the radiance of one sun. Sanjaya says we have to use our imagination to imagine hundreds of thousands of suns. So already we're beyond sort of comprehension. And even that is just pales in comparison to this vision. What might possibly be this effulgent, wondrous vision? We start hearing that of this vision, this picture starts to get painted of all living beings, from the devatas, from the demigods, down to Vasuki, the serpent, assembled in one place. How is it possible? It's not possible. So this vision, in many ways, I would suggest, is also a kind of a making possible what is impossible, a making comprehensible what is actually inconceivable. How can there be something that has no beginning, no middle, or no end, that is completely limitless, but how can it be encapsulated in a vision, which by definition would seem to have limits or boundaries, right? You're looking at the screen. When I made this PowerPoint presentation, or technically it's a keynote presentation because I'm a Mac user, but when I made this keynote presentation, I had to be careful because sometimes an image or some of the text would go off the screen. And I would know it's there, but what good is it if in the presentation you can't access it, you can't see it? So by definition, a vision, right, a screen, if you will, has borders and boundaries. And yet somehow the vision of the universal form simultaneously is a vision. So it is an actual, literal, concrete visual, but it somehow is one that has no limitations, it has no boundaries. So again, at best, we can sort of talk about the paradox of it. In some ways, if you're familiar with Zen tradition, I think there's something analogous going on where it's sort of meant to blow our minds and bring us to the limits of our mental capacity, right? And it's meant to kind of humble us and say, I really don't have words for this. I really don't have a way of sort of grasping this mentally. So I just have to sort of accept it in the moment. It's a wondrous experience. Arjuna very poetically and beautifully famously says, Shashi Surya Netra, that the sun and the moon are your two eyes. Beautiful, beautiful image. He says, I see simultaneously, again, inconceivably, I see the one, the unitary absolute truth, and innumerable, immeasurable, limitless multiplicity in one place simultaneously. How can there be simultaneous unity and unending, infinite multiplicity? But this is the vision. And yet, as we move through these verses, and I realize we're going quite quickly, I would invite you to read the whole chapter. So this is no substitute for reading the chapter. But something interesting starts to happen. We go from just wondrous to a little challenging, because now Arjuna says, I see innumerable arms, faces, mouths, and bellies. I see a glaring effulgence. And he admits, he says, it's difficult to behold. I have to look away. In fact, as we go further into this set of verses, he says, he starts using imagery that almost evokes pain. He says, it's like a blazing fire that's burning the universe. I see your gaping mouths. I see many faces, eyes, arms, thighs, legs, bellies, and many, he says, terrible teeth. He uses words like the Sanskrit word ghoram, which if it's a cognate maybe of the English word gory. Like when a horror movie or something is very gory, very grisly. Ghoram in Sanskrit is a word like that. It's terrible. It's horrifying. Ghora is by sort of even linguistically, it's what we might call a negative emotion. It's a challenging emotion, or it's a challenging state. I don't want to do the thing where I just read off the slide, but I couldn't resist it. The text, the language is so visceral, even in translation. It's so powerful. And I want to just invite you just for a minute or two. And again, if you want to just sort of close your eyes, if you're able to, take a deep breath and just try to hear and try to connect with whatever emotions arise in you as we just reflect on and meditate on. These are Arjuna's words, beholding none other than Krishna, but Krishna in this unexpectedly wondrous and yet terrible form. He says, "O great one, seeing this wondrous and terrible form, all the planets and the demigods, all the planetary systems are perturbed. All the hosts of demigods are surrendering to you and entering into you. Some of them, very much afraid, are offering prayers with folded hands. O mighty armed one, all the planets with their demigods are disturbed, seeing your great form with its many faces, eyes, arms, thighs, legs, and bellies, and your many, many terrible teeth. And as they are disturbed, Lord, so am I. O all-pervading Vishnu, seeing you with your many radiant colors touching the sky, your gaping mouths, your great glowing eyes, my mind is perturbed by fear. I can no longer maintain my steadiness, my equilibrium of mind. O Lord of lords, God of gods, O refuge of the worlds, please, please be gracious to me. I cannot keep my balance. Seeing thus your blazing, death-like faces and awful teeth in all directions, I am bewildered." This is Arjuna. This is Arjuna 11 chapters or 10 and a half chapters into the Gita. This is Arjuna who's already heard from Krishna, love me, think of me, I'm here for you, do your duty, thinking of me. This is Arjuna, the great warrior who chose Krishna to be his companion, his charioteer. And yet, before that same Krishna, he's saying, I can't even stand. I'm dizzy, right? Think of how, in one sense, how relatable this is as embodied beings, right? He's so much of this language is physiological, it's bodily, it's visceral. It's Arjuna saying, I'm being knocked to my feet. My head is spinning, quite literally. Um, it's almost like a panic attack. Um, at the risk of sounding very inelegant and crude, Arjuna is majorly freaking out. So, what is Arjuna's freaking out doing in the 11th chapter, in very close to the center of the Gita, in the Bhakti section of the Gita? Right? This is not a very pleasant experience for Arjuna. And it goes, friends, unfortunately, it goes from merely frightful to downright terrifying because it gets even worse. What's more terrifying than Arjuna beholding this form of the Lord that is so huge and almost violently fierce? Well, it becomes personalized because this vision is not just fierce in an abstract sense, but this vision is fierce to Arjuna's actual lived experience because now Arjuna sees the soldiers on both sides with their heads smashed in the teeth. These are actual translations. Their heads smashed by the teeth of this form. They're entering into this form, into the fiery mouths of this form, like moths flying into a flame, like rivers pulsating into the ocean. And he says, your mouths, your many mouths, are licking up and devouring all these beings, who are not just abstract beings, but who are Arjuna's very near and dear ones, his own loved ones, and the soldiers and warriors that he's going to have to face on the battlefield on both sides. Arjuna is bewildered, he's terrified, he's humbled, and he concludes by asking this question. He says, "Who are you, O Lord of Lords? I thought I knew you. I thought you were just Krishna, but now I'm not even sure of that. Can you tell me who you are and what your mission is?" And now it's interesting because Krishna's response, this very, very famous response, quoted among other people, Robert Oppenheimer, right here in Princeton, actually. He was for some time actually based here in my neck of the woods. But when the first atomic bomb was detonated, Oppenheimer, who was a student of the Gita, he very spontaneously uttered this verse that is Krishna's response to Arjuna's question, "Who are you and what is your mission?" Krishna responds, "Time I am the great destroyer of all worlds. Kalosmi. I am time, or I am death, because the word kala can mean time or death. So Time I am, death I am. I am the great all-devouring force of time or of death, and I have come to destroy all worlds. I am inevitable destruction. And then Krishna says, by my power, by this unstoppable force of time or death that I am, that you are now just getting a glimpse of, all these warriors on this battlefield, they've already been slain, right? Their death is guaranteed. Their destruction is guaranteed. It's just a matter of time. But then he says, Nimitta matra savyasachin, be my instrument, O wielder, O ambidextrous wielder of the bow. So there's an interesting, before we move on, there's an interesting juxtaposition here also where Krishna is saying, look, I'm this awesome power of unstoppable time, death. I'm this force that's beyond all puny, living entities. What are we in the face of death or of time? And yet we also have a role to play because we also have an opportunity to be an instrument of the Lord's plan, of our dharma. So there's a simultaneous, I think, recognition of Krishna, of the divine, as this form of kind of cosmic destiny, if you will. And yet also we have our free will. What is our free will? Our free will is, am I going to step up to the moment and play my role as an instrument in the hands of the divine? Either way, right? Life is going to happen. But can I approach life? Can I approach my duty? Can I approach even difficulties in this spirit of, Lord, let me just be an instrument for what you want done, for what you will have done in this moment? Arjuna is stunned. He makes prayers. The text says, with fearful and faltering voice. So he's still experiencing fear. But in that fear, he's channeling that fear into glorification of Krishna. He calls Krishna the God of gods, Deva Deva Jagatpate, the original creator, the supreme refuge. And he says, everything. And now Arjuna begs forgiveness in this spirit of prayer. He says, Lord, seeing you in this form, I'm suddenly feeling quite embarrassed about the casual ways in which I related to you. He says, thinking of you simply as my friend, I rashly addressed you, Hey Krishna, Hey Yadava, Hey Saketi. Please forgive whatever I've done, he says, in madness or in love. I may have dishonored you, seemingly dishonored you many times, treating you so casually, perhaps even taking your presence for granted in that way. And so we might say from a spirit of bhakti, well, isn't all that wonderful relationality, that wonderful loving relation, isn't that what we're aiming towards? Isn't that what we aspire towards? Why is Arjuna apologizing for it? Why is he begging forgiveness? And we get yet a glimpse into this because Arjuna's begging forgiveness is not saying, Lord, you're not my friend. It's not saying, Lord, you're not, that I regret having those intimate, loving, friendly relationships with you. It's not regret. It's, Lord, in a sense, let me never take you for granted. Let me never forget that, yes, you are my dear friend, but also simultaneously, you are so infinitely greater than me. You are the infinite. I am the infinitesimal. And so Arjuna very beautifully, he evokes three relationships. He says, forgive me, Lord, but forgive me the way a father tolerates or overlooks his son, right? A small child, I remember when my daughter was very young, right? Sometimes just in her enthusiasm, she might jump on my back, right? Little children do this. And of course, I'm rapidly becoming an old man. So I would, it might have been jarring in that moment, or it might even have been seemingly inappropriate in that moment, right? I may have been trying to give a presentation like this, and this little toddler would jump into the Zoom screen and just jump on my back or around my neck and say, Papa, Papa. So is there a fault? Seemingly there's a fault, but the love of a father quickly overlooks that so-called fault. And so Arjuna says, just as a father tolerates a child, he says, as a friend forgives a peer or a friend, a best friend's, sometimes maybe forgetting their sort of formality, and as a lover treats their beloved. In that way, Lord, please forgive or overlook any way in which I might have taken you for granted. And then in that spirit, Arjuna reveals his heart, and this will bring bring us towards the conclusion of the chapter. And in some sense, maybe really for bhakti yogis, for bhaktas, what is the real sort of secret teaching of this chapter? I made some promises that I would reveal the secret teachings of the 11th chapter. So I'm going to try to make good on my promise here. We get the secret teachings in these final verses, these final beautiful verses of the Gita, of the 11th chapter of the Gita, where Arjuna reveals his heart. He says, Lord, I am so grateful. I'm so gladdened, he says, being gifted the divine vision to see, not because of anything I've done, but just because you're so kind to me. You took my request seriously and you showed me this form. So I'm so grateful, Lord. Please don't think that I'm not grateful. But at the same time, if I'm being honest, my mind is disturbed. I'm feeling a lot of fear. And Lord, I know I asked for it, but this fear, it's blocking, it's taking over my heart, and it's making it very difficult for me to love you the way I wish to love you. And so he says, he makes this request. He says, I know I asked for it to see this cosmic form, but Lord, maybe you can take it away now, and maybe instead you can show me your form as that four-armed Narayana, that Vishnu form. So it's a little mysterious. Why does he ask for this four-armed Narayana form? And some of the commentators, they explain that in a sense, right, it may be like they talk about, sort of when you go too far from one extreme to the other. So going from like 0 to 100, right, that might give you whiplash, so to speak. So Arjuna kind of prays in this way, like, okay, maybe we can gradually kind of go back to something that feels a little bit more accessible. So Lord, I still want to keep in mind that you and I are not equals. And yet I want something that's a little bit more accessible. So he says, maybe you just show me your forearm, Narayana form, which feels more accessible and yet also can remind me that you are beyond me. And now Krishna reciprocates by revealing his own heart. And he says, yes, this universal form that I showed you, it was a gift. He says, no one really has seen this form before, but you asked and I wanted to reciprocate with your question, with your request. So I showed you this form. But he says so beautifully, he says, now you've been perturbed, you've been bewildered seeing this horrible feature of mine. That doesn't make me happy either. So now he says beautifully, let it be finished. Just like that, poof, let it disappear. I turned it on, I'll turn it off. And he says, my dear devotee, my bhakta, my dear, dear one, please be free of all disturbance. It doesn't make me happy for your heart to be overwhelmed with fear. I needed to show you this because I needed to impress upon you what the magnitude of what I had told you about in the 10th chapter, what I just told you about. And you asked for it, so I wanted you to see it, but I don't want your heart filled with fear and disturbance and anxiety. So let it be gone. And now we come to the final verses where the secret is revealed. To encourage, this is, really pertinent language here. The Sanskrit term literally means to give hope, to fill one with hope. To encourage Arjuna, who is by this point very fearful, bhitam, Krishna shows him his four-armed form. And then even from the four-armed form, Krishna further withdraws into this his original swakam and beautiful somyavapu two-armed form. And Arjuna says, seeing this beautiful human-like form, manusham rupam. Manusham means, literally means man-like or human-like. So there's still a recognition. This is still divine, right? It's not that Krishna in his two-armed form is any less divine. In fact, quite the opposite. This is divinity, but it's divinity, manusham rupam, and somya. It's so beautiful and so beautifully human-like that Arjuna says, now I can be myself again. He says, Sacheta prakritim gataha literally means now my own nature has returned to me, or I've returned to my own nature. I am myself again. That other state of being, that wasn't natural. That wasn't real. That wasn't really who I am. But who am I when I'm at my best? When I'm actually balanced, when I'm able to behold you, that is when I see you and I'm able to access you. Manusham. So what makes this Manusham Rupam so precious, so important? Krishna says, my dear Arjuna, this form of mine, meaning this two-armed form, he's already said, this universal form was very special, and even great demigods and rishis and sages have not seen this form, but I've given you the divine eyes to see it. But now he says something even more extraordinary. He says, my dear Arjuna, this form of mine, this two-armed form of mine that you are now seeing is very difficult to behold, very rare. He says, the form you are seeing with your transcendental eyes cannot be understood simply by studying the Vedas, nor by undergoing severe penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. All of those things are commendable. Krishna is not saying those things are not, that we should reject those things. No, studying the Vedas is so important. Austerity, penance has its role. Giving in charity, particularly for those of us who are privileged and who are perhaps householders and are able to do that, that's an imperative. Worship, right? Why would Krishna speak against worship? So he's not speaking against these things, but he's saying these things alone will not give us that access. That access to this form is so rare because it can only be attained, he says, by undivided devotional service, ananya bhakti. That is the only way, he says, that I can be understood as I am standing before you now and can thus be seen directly. So some of our sharper participants here, sorry, I'm not trying to imply that there are less sharp participants. You're all sharp, wonderful, thoughtful participants. But some of you may have noticed, well, wait a second. What's so rare about this form if this was the form that Krishna started with, this two-armed form that's a two-armed form that was right there in Bhagavad Gita verse 1:1, right? Or, right there at the first chapter. So what's changed? Well, in one sense, what's changed is now Arjuna has come full circle. He's been able to see and appreciate the universal cosmic form, the terrifying, terrible form, the wondrous form, the form that is that face of divinity that is all devouring death, time, that is destiny. And yet that same awesome, terrifying form actually is just a spark of the two-handed, two-armed, loving, relational form of Krishna. That when we engage in relationship with Krishna, we're not relating to anything less than. We're actually relating to the source of that great cosmic power who is making himself so preciously available to us, that is actually making himself and coming down to our level to engage in a loving, personal relationship with us. How rare, how precious, how amazing, how wonderful is that? I want to leave us with just 4 takeaways. There are perhaps many takeaways, but I want to suggest to us, and before I open it up to some questions and comments in our remaining time, I'm trying really hard, Jack, to stay within the confines of time for a chapter that is all about busting out of the confines and being limitless. But just to give some nama rupa, some sort of name and form and shape to this, I want to suggest 4 takeaways that we as aspiring bhakti yogis or bhaktas, we can maybe, take away from the 11th chapter and put into practice in our own devotional lives. The first is that as much as bhakti is often a turning away from fear and towards love, I was driving by a church just after dropping my daughter to school, and I saw on the billboard of this church, right? There's these church billboards, at least in the States, have very pithy sayings on them. And this one billboard, this church board that I passed, it said, where there is love, there can be no fear. And I thought that was beautiful in its own way. And in some ways, our own kind of Krishna Bhakti theology takes a very similar stance. Yes, where there is love, how can there be any fear? So we can, as we aspire towards that kind of fearlessness, abhaya charanaravindha, the fearlessness that's found when we take shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna. So sometimes there is that emphasis on going beyond fear, and yet this chapter also reminds us that there is a power to having a healthy sort of fear, if it helps to deepen our appreciation. So just as Arjuna beholds his vision and then it leads him to a place of greater appreciation where he says, Lord, if I ever take you for granted, please forgive me the way that a father forgives a child or a lover her beloved. In a similar way, we can be chastened to remember, let us not take for granted that yes, we can have this very personal, very intimate, very informal relationship with Krishna, and yet that same Krishna is Deva Deva Jagatpate, is the God of gods. And so sometimes we need in our own lives a little wake up call, a little jarring reminder of yes, okay, let me not take this for granted. So also with devotee relationships and with our great gurus, right? Sometimes we may also take the great souls, the great Vaishnavas for granted. And so let us not do this. Sometimes we need a little reminders. I know sometimes in my own relationship with my guru, sometimes when I behold, or when I'm privy to, or happen to be in the right place at the right time, and I see him relate to someone, maybe I see him relating to some, dignitary or something, and it's just like, wow, it is a little like frightening in some sense, but it also deepens my appreciation, deepens my love, and deepens my gratitude that this same person makes the time for me. This same person is so patient and loving and kind to me and sits with me, has sat down on the same level with me and just asked me, "How's it going, Venkata? What's going on in your life? Share with me." Right? How amazing is that? Let me never take that for granted. So the role of healthy fear. Another aspect of this chapter is um, Krishna shows this amazing, terrifying form, but in some ways it's also a reassurance to Arjuna that Krishna's power is there, but that same power is what protects us and humbles us. That it's Krishna that is doing everything, and that we merely have a role to play. And so that brings us to the third lesson, the third takeaway, that in any given interaction, at any given moment, we can check in with ourselves and remind ourselves that we are meant to merely be an instrument in the hands of God. That's not merely in the sense of that's a, you know, that's anything less than or that's anything to be ashamed of. It's merely in the sense of it should humble us to remember that Krishna is the actual doer. But to be an instrument in the hands of a master craftsman, or to be an instrument in the hands of a master musician, is itself a wonderful thing. And then finally, that bhakti is such a rare and precious gift that that how rare is bhakti that if Krishna is saying the universal form is something that is so precious and so rare, and yet rarer still, more precious still is when I assume this manusha rupam, this accessible human-like form, that is so rare, that is so precious, that is such a gift. Let us never take that for granted. Let us always appreciate that, and let us take this larger than life vision of the 11th chapter and deepen our appreciation for the intimacy that bhakti offers us. In the Gita, Krishna very famously says in the 18th chapter, he instructs Arjuna, or he offers Arjuna this opportunity to reflect and then to do what he wishes. So the choice is always ours. There's no force in bhakti. Krishna is always giving us so much to reflect on, and says in essence, make of this what you will. And so in a similar spirit, I want to invite you to take this presentation however you'd like, reflect on it, and then if you have any questions, comments, how would you like this, whatever we've shared in the last 50 or so minutes, how would you like this to show up in your own practice of bhakti? So with that, I'll bring it to a close. How do I stop my, yeah, okay, there we go.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. Venkata Bhatta, Prabhu. We're sending all our love and appreciation. Um, just wow, you're an excellent teacher. I was receiving lots of chat messages, personal messages, beautiful reflections, beautiful teaching. In the essence of time, let's take one reflection slash question from our dear Hanna. Welcome.
Namaste. I'm Hanna.
Namaste.
Namaste. I'm a co-founder of Happy Jack Yoga, and yeah, really, I'm having this big aha moment that I don't know if I can express it intelligently right now. But what I loved about your presentation, I've always kind of found it a little bit tricky to understand the Gita, and coming from a Western mind paradigm where everything's always kind of like just like you always ask yourself the opposite, like how can God be good when there's bad things that happen to people? And from your presentation, I take away now there's like a sense of like things falling into place when you describe how the vision that Arjuna was having, because he got the divine vision and he could see also the what we might, see as difficult, as
Yes.
for example, time, right? Time doesn't wait for anybody, and we're all going to age, and we're all kind of have a hard time dealing with that. And this explains, I don't know, it somehow explains to me that there is no, how can I say, polarity in that way. Like, yes, God creates everything and holds us and is an incredible blessing. And also there is a marching order of things. And
Yes.
it's part of it. Like, I feel like it's less fragmented in myself right now, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense to me, and thank you so much for reflecting that back. What you're saying resonates with me so much, for a number of reasons, but also very personally. I find myself now at a stage in my life where I'm both a parent to my child, but I'm also the primary caretaker of my elderly parent, and it's real. The force of time is undeniable. I feel like I'm every day seeing another glimpse of the universal form, and it's hard, and at times it feels harsh, and it does not feel loving. It feels very painful, and yet what my own aspiring bhakti practice has been, such a precious, invaluable gift to me is I can I can have that darshan and feel those feelings, and I can also I can also not be alone in that experience, because that same divinity that is in one sense the inevitable marching of time, on a deeper level is also my loving best friend who's seated beside me and who's holding my hand and giving me the strength to go through this very difficult process and to try to act as an instrument of care and grace for others. So thank you so much for just reminding me of that, and it's so much resonating with what you just said.
Beautiful. Yeah, and just show Hannah the book you've got in front of you
Yeah.
there.
So
The book.
I'm writing my final thesis on grief, and I found a lot of beautiful contemplations on grief in this book. So, and I just read it yesterday, and I didn't know that you were here today, so I was so glad.
She just a
Amazing.
moment ago, she sends me a photo. She's like, "Did he write this?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's his book." So nice coincidence.
Hannah, would you please email me afterwards, and maybe Jack can put us in touch. But I'd love to share more in terms of the grief piece, because that's something that I'm in my own sort of chaplaincy work very much working on and thinking about right now. So I'd love to compare notes with you.
Thank you. I'd love that for sure. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Well, we're sending our love, appreciation, Muskoka, Ontario, Canada. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
And we have another hand up. Maybe like just real quick. I see Lucinda, who when I first saw that, I wondered, is that Lucinda Mosher, the co-author of the book, or is it another Lucinda? Are you able to come on video? And if not, that's okay. The hand might have went up by accident. But anyways,
I was telling Jack I have a couple of Lucindas who are dear friends, and wonderful sort of you know I yeah, members of a community. So I'm not sure which one this is, but
anyway, they're not able to. It might have been an accident. They lifted it. But anyways, we're good on time. I just want to note our friend Skip in the chat here, who is member of the Yale and Harvard community. He's been writing an essay after just about every single one of these conference sessions, and now he finally shared the link. So if you want to go see, he's got blogs and papers written about like everyone, and no doubt he'll have one from Venkata Bhatta Prabhu.
amazing.
So thank you for that contribution, and thank you for taking the time. Just there's such a precision in the way that you present, and I can see you really took time to think this through. There's so much you could have shared. You could have shared your personal journey, which would have been very nourishing as well. But this was very helpful, and it very much did complement the overall conference intention. So we appreciate your time, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. What a joy to be here. And Krishna willing, I will see you, Jack, and maybe some other folks who are on here in person in Cambridge, just a few weeks from now. Yeah.
That's right. We will see you in a few weeks. Well, friends, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We're going to share some notes underneath the video so you can stay in touch with Venkata Bhatta Prabhu, as well as a link to his book. People are asking in the chat. So friends, make it an amazing rest of the day, and we will see you again tomorrow for another fantastic session. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Haribol.
Haribol, Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.